So what I'm trying to do is kind of like talk about, in a way, about the governance of smart cities, or if you want, kind of like, I mean, as my predecessor, Jan Albrecht, was saying, kind of like thinking about, why are we actually trying to implement all this technology? So what are our aims? And there's some trying to put out some basics, basically, which we kind of like should have in mind to understand what are we actually doing and why we're doing it for. Is there any way to move these slides, or do I? Okay. So the first one is smart. It's not just about tech, but can we, next one? I mean, one of the important things is kind of like, when you want to be like a smart city, and then one of the things is you need to be kind of like comparable. You need to understand where you are, basically. And one of the problems of a lot of cities is basically that they're looking at the administrative definition of the cities and the administrative data. And just to give you an example to make you understand how absurd that is, basically, is on the left hand you have basically Paris. The black dots is the Paris, the administrative city. I mean, the red area is basically, the metropolitan area of Paris, and that really is the entity, the socio-economic entity that you care about. In Rome, you have a very different picture. So you see the city of Rome, the administrative city of Rome, goes way beyond the areas where actually people are living. Now, the data that most people are comparing are the data for, the black dots, basically. So they're comparing like the 20% of the people who are living in the core of the Paris agglomeration. It's like everybody who's living in Rome. That already is not very useful. Now also, you know that the 20% living in Paris in the core of the city are typically the ones who have much higher education levels, much higher income levels than everybody else on average. So I mean, you're comparing basically, when you're comparing administrative city data, you're comparing like, in some places, the top 10 or the top 20 with like everybody else in the other places. That is just nonsense, sorry. And that is a real problem. And if you kind of like want to make smart cities, you have to understand where your cities is, what the problems are. And one of the first things you need to understand is have realistic data for your cities. And I mean, there is a definition for metropolitan areas that has been done by the European Union together with us. And there is a database now, but I mean, the data that's available for that is way below what really is needed to really understand what the situation is. And if you're not really having, the data to understand where you are, then you can't really make very smart choices about the technology and everything that you need to implement. Can I have next slide, please? Next. Then obviously, I mean, why do we want to be smart cities? We want our cities to make our cities more productive. When you're thinking about productivity of cities, basically, I mean, what the underlying productivity advantage of cities is are what economists call agglomeration economies. And they are mainly rising from what is usually referred to sharing, thicker labor markets, and learning. And then we also have to think, how can we use basically smart technology to basically improve these drivers of the agglomeration benefits in cities. And for example, when we're talking about knowledge spillovers, then to the degree we can use smart technology to improve this knowledge spillovers, to improve the connectivity between the people in the city, then this is an effect here. Or if we're talking about thicker labor markets, then to the degree that we can use the smart technology to make sure that actually it's easier for people to get access to jobs, either virtually or by having better functioning transport systems, then this is like smart technology that is improving productivity in our cities, and so on. So we really have to think about, what are the mechanisms. I don't have much time, so I don't want to go too much in detail, but what are the mechanisms which are making our cities productive? And then we have to think about, what are the smart technologies that can actually help with that. Next one. Next one. Then next one. Then obviously in cities you have benefits from agglomeration economies, but you also have agglomeration costs. And if you talk about the livability of cities, then often, you can make your city more productive, and that's nice, but the immediate benefits for the population of the livability often are much, much higher when you're tackling the agglomeration costs. So when we're doing smart cities, we also have to think about where can our smart cities help by getting the agglomeration costs down. And they are typically, in the area of congestion, pollution, possibly also inequality. These are areas where I think smart technologies can help, and we have to think about what are the most effective solutions there. Next one. Then also, smart cities need to be well governed, and what we're talking about here in a way is it's connected to what you were seeing before. Kind of like the functional areas, kind of like the metropolitan areas, of the city. So we're not talking just about the core cities, but we're talking about the whole entity, because when we are implementing kind of like smart technologies, I mean, that obviously doesn't stop at the administrative border of one municipality and the other. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. You want to roll it out for the whole economic entity that you're having, basically. And here we have a problem because we love cities who are very fragmented. For example, I mean, Paris, where I'm coming from, in the Paris metropolitan area is more than 1,400 municipalities. That's obviously, it's one of the largest numbers that you find, but typically in the OECD, in almost 25% of the metropolitan areas in the OECD, you have more than 100 municipalities. Now, whenever you need to take decisions, where basically you need to get the mayors together and they need to agree on something, you know, if you have like 3 or 4 to agree on something, that's difficult. If you have more than 10, that's really difficult. If you have more than 100, you can just outright forget about it. So we have a problem here. We have a problem of basically that the administrative structures are basically creating a situation where a lot of infrastructure investment is not happening or is happening in wrong ways. And that also is a huge obstacle to implementing smart solutions, because, I mean, if you can't get, I mean, basic infrastructure being built, like, I mean, connections to for example, airports, and there's examples for that, I mean, then, I mean, if you want to roll out smart city solutions in the whole metropolitan area, you can also forget about that. So we have a real problem here, and there really needs to be, I mean, solutions found for that. And just to give you an idea, we did run some regressions, and we were showing that basically when you are in the metropolitan area where you're having twice as many municipalities for a given population size than another metropolitan area, then you're losing each year 6% of your productivity. So it means basically your GDP per capita each year is 6% lower. So that's quite, you know, you're wasting a lot of, I mean, resources basically, and possibilities, income for people, or kind of like money that you can use for improving the life in the city. Next one. Next one. So as I was saying, I mean, smart also means you need to be serious about the metropolitan scale. And so in a lot of OECD countries, there's metropolitan reform going on. So basically there's a drive to kind of like create metropolitan authorities in one way or another. We've been doing a survey to see what the situation is. There's still 1/3 of metropolitan areas in the OECD where there's no metropolitan authority at all. And there is almost 20%, but only almost 20%, where these metropolitan areas have regulatory powers. That means where you have regulatory authorities, where you have metropolitan authorities that really have sufficient scope and scale to really implement things. And the other ones, it's more like a cooperation between mayors, which is also very important, but which usually doesn't get you very far. So there still is a very large need for basically improving the metropolitan structure in most of the OECD cities, and in Europe especially, to make sure that we are in a situation where we can really, I mean, successfully implement the smart city solutions on a larger scale, which just goes beyond, you know, the core of Paris, for example, as you were seeing before. Yeah, can we go on? Can we go on? Go on? Go on? Okay. That's also a very important point. Smart means open data. Smart cities need open data. And, no, just go back, No, back. Sorry, here, this one, yeah. And the problem, obviously, is to some degree that you may not have people who can work with open data, but in a lot of universities, you have people these days who can do it. In the OECD, we have people who could do that. The problem is most open data you don't get. And here, the problem is not only, I mean, the public sector is increasingly opening up the data, but most of the data that's interesting these days is generated in the private sector. I mean, all the mobile phone data, for example, they can be extremely useful. They can really help cities to make, I mean, better transport systems, because you know where people want to go and these kind of things. I mean, there's a whole bunch of researchers out there who are asking for nothing else than basically getting access to the data, and then they're writing PhDs, doing research for free, basically, and that will help to improve the cities and the life of everybody in the cities. The problem is these data are so expensive that people usually don't get access to them. And that is a really, really big problem. So basically one of the, one of the really big wastes that we're having at the moment is basically that all this research community is not getting access to all this data that is being produced because of, you know, it's private, and that, I mean, the companies are trying to make money out of that, and the countries and also the European Union hasn't really put enough pressure on basically to make sure that these data, at least for research purposes, gets free, and that would have a huge dramatic increase knowledge for cities, make them much smarter, and would allow them to be much, much better managed, much, much more efficient places, with a much larger degree of livability, much less congestion, and so on and so forth. Can I have the... Okay, then also, getting towards the end, smart also means that you're not only relying on yourself as a city, but you're also using the potential of your surrounding region. That means you need to be well connected with your surrounding regions. That means you need to try to cooperate. I mean, especially in Europe, I mean, our cities, I mean, face it, compared to like cities in Asia and also increasingly in Africa, they're really small. So, I mean, if our cities are to be kind of like, you know, be seen on an international scale, I mean, they really need to team up with, I mean, the surrounding areas as much as they can. And also, I mean, if you're looking, for example, you can show that the cities, they're having a very positive effect on the surrounding region spaces. So you can, for example, when you're looking at the growth rates of regions, depending on the distance to a city, I mean, you see that these growth rates are declining relatively quickly, but also that the rayonnement, you know, the impact of the city really goes a long way. You see, I mean, it's basically up to like 180 or 300 minutes by car. And what's important here is the connectivity. It's not basically how close you are to the city, but basically how easy it is to get there. And in that sense also, that shows that if we want to use the dynamic of the regions which are surrounding the cities, because, I mean, you have a lot of rural regions where you have actually really high growth rates, but this is typically the ones who are surrounding the cities. If you want to use this dynamic, I mean, you also have to make sure that you have good connections between the cities and the surrounding areas. And that's also a way of being smart and of helping to basically, I mean, and technology can play a role in trying to get making these connections happen, because, I mean, connectivity is obviously roads, but it's not only roads. There's a lot of other ways you can be connected. And that's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ahrend, for your interest.